Hey guys, I'm Brittany,
I'm Maria.
and this is the Be More podcast.
I was gonna say I think hold on before you start this. Every every time we do this, I feel like there's a slight lag. So whenever you see my hands go up, I'm like, is she gonna remember? Because like there's a lag whenever we record a little bit.
Ah,
So when I pause for the intro now, this new intro, I'm like, oh, she better remember because it's gonna be awkward again.
no, I do. I'm gonna do it. I do it. I know it. As
Yeah.
long as I'm actively paying attention when I go to start speaking, I'll do it.
Okay, good. Okay.
But I did it.
Hello everyone.
Hi guys. Okay, so here is my question. We're gonna start today's episode off with a question, and I'm gonna ask Maria because I've been thinking about it, and I think about it often, and I just got some really cool insight onto it.
Go on.
Do people change?
Oh, yeah,
That's my
I
question
think
for you.
so.
Cool. Talk more.
Talk. um Obviously I can only speak to my experiences. Duh. That's I feel like every episode's caveat. I think I've changed. Like okay, this is hard now. Like people have a core personality or whatever, but with experiences and time, I feel like and also the help of like the influence of others around them that they can change for the better or for the worse. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, I think that
Yeah,
makes sense.
I think that's my answer.
Cool.
Okay, great.
I have struggled with this question. Honestly, I feel like for decades now,
Yeah, that's
but I
fair.
just heard um so for those of you who don't know, I'm a science nerd and I just
Yeah.
heard like a TED Talk. I think it was a TED Talk or maybe he's done a TED Talk and he was just talking about this was just like something that someone else like got a recording of him. Um, I was listening to this neuroscientist, David Eagleman. That
Okay,
sounds right.
sure.
Um, he's been writing like he's written a lot of books about neuroplasticity because he's also a writer. He's like
Oh.
person after my own heart. Like he's a very much science person, but he also is a very creative person. And he talks about
Hmm.
how frustrating it is that there's this huge gap between science and like the common person because they use all of
Uh-huh.
this technical terminology that seems out of reach for the average
Like
person
the
and no
average
one's like
person.
bridging the gap, which is literally what I do in the dance world. So I was listening to him talk and I was just like, oh my God, I love
Yeah.
you. But he brought up this really interesting thing because he just wrote a whole book about how the brain changes constantly.
Okay.
And he calls it live wired because neuroplasticity is apparently an obsolete concept for the way that our brains work because after you mold plastic, you can't remold it again. It just like is a new shape and
Okay.
our brain is ever changing.
Okay.
And he was talking about how even like by the end of this conversation that we're having right now, like our brains will be a different shape.
Oh, so it's constant. It's not like
Like
okay.
your brain is constantly changing.
Well, I feel
So
like that I can agree to that, but go on.
so then I have this like paradox, this frustrating paradox of like, okay, so my brain is changing, which means the way that I'm thinking is changing, which means I'm changing. But then I have like these instances where I remember like I have friends who I won't see for a long time and we'll get together and they're like, "Oh, I'm so happy like you haven't changed. Like you haven't changed." And I'm like and then I look at it like a good thing
Uh-huh.
that I haven't changed.
That
But then I
haven't
was like,
changed.
"So how is that possible?" And then I kind of fall to the I think we change in all of our physical abilities, right? Like your brain changes, your body changes, like those things are all changing. But what makes the difference is that your intangible things, like your values, don't
Hmm.
change.
Oh, I see. Well, it could also be taking your example of like your friends I haven't seen in a long time saying that you haven't changed. Like it could just be their perception.
No, that's true.
Like it could just be them like being nostalgic and be like, oh, Britney's the same. But like you only see them for like a couple hours, not like the whole
Also
spectrum.
true.
Like it could
Yeah.
both could also be true, which is also like a paradox in itself. Like it you haven't changed within like that little instance of time that you spent with them, but
Right.
given a bigger time span,
Yeah. Yeah. That's like
forget
when
it.
this is like when, you go to I see a lot of extended family on Thanksgiving that I don't see all the time and I'm like, "Oh, nothing's different." So I can
Yeah.
understand that.
But then again, it right, because you're not with them
Yeah.
within day in and day out. So I
Yeah.
feel like people change. You just don't see that unless you're very close with them or you see them every day.
Or you see them in like a specific setting where
Yeah,
they're
exactly. Like,
changing the most.
right, if you're seeing someone for the holidays, because again, just to be relevant, like they're probably gonna be the same because it's like a happy time of the year and like people don't want to, I mean, then again, some people do want to mess up the holiday time sometimes because that's just their personality. But if you just randomly see them like living their life, because people also change within if their professional career, their
Mm-hmm.
personal, their significant other, like it's just like, different
Yeah.
personalities
And
come
I
out.
feel like if you don't, when you look at it in the different lenses of like environment, right? Like your personal life, your work life, your
Yeah,
relationship life, um, I've definitely noticed that if you change in one, you're more likely to change in another. But
I
your
agree.
lack of change in one can also stop you from like changing in terms of development in the others.
Oh, if you want to stay like stagnant in one, is that what
Yeah,
you're
like
saying?
I and
Yeah.
like I've definitely like as an example, like I've definitely noticed that as I've built myself as like a business person, it's totally affected the way I see things as a quote unquote normal person,
Normal.
right? Like who I am on the day to day. But then I also have seen, right, and that's like a good growth change thing. But then I've also seen how, and a lot of the times this happens without our awareness of it, I've seen how my lack of change as a person has affected my lack of ability to change, like for a relationship to grow, right? For a relationship to
Yeah.
change, or like for my ability to meet my professional,
Obligations or whatever.
all of that. Yeah. Um, so it's interesting. Like, I feel like, or when we change for like our entire episode last week, where we talk about changing for the sake of like being influenced by something else. I I think that's the where I lay. And then, like, do you see? Here's my next question for you.
Yeah.
Do you see change as? My brain doesn't want to ask this question because I'm like, it's not that black and white, and I know that, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Do you see change as a good thing? Do you see change as a bad thing?
It depends on the context.
Right? I know. This
It
goes
really
back to like
depends.
episodes ago.
Like, it could be like, and we're talking about change in a person, right? Not just change in general. Like,
No, we're
that's the
talking about
topic
like
at
a
hand.
person. Yeah.
It really depends on the person. Like, I'm struggling to answer this question because
I
it's like,
know. These are the weird guys. If you want to know what it's like to be on inside my brain on a daily basis, these are the things that are just running in the background in my brain all the
you should get some rest.
time.
Um, no, well, like, look, it really depends on the person. I feel like it starts off with how you're raised, which I think is the majority of quote unquote bad people's problems, in
Mhm.
my opinion, is
When
like,
those values are set into you instead of you
right.
setting
Yeah,
them
going back to your
yourself.
previous point before, like you're setting your values and beliefs and whatever. And that usually comes from how you were raised or how, like you grew up with a family or without or whatever your situation is. So if a quote unquote, I don't know what bad is anymore, like a person that hasn't had a good upbringing changes for the better, then obviously that's good. Like, duh.
Yeah.
But then you can also have someone that's like well off, not, and like I'm not saying financially well off, just like well off as in like they were stable in their childhood basically, and then turn a leaf or whatever, and that's bad
Yeah.
change. Like it really depends on
And you
like,
could even have somebody, right, who is in a not good situation but has a strong like value for hope and believes in
yeah,
something better and then they have a change for losing that, right? Like a change where that doesn't
right,
exist anymore.
right. And that's like any like, and there's so many variables to it. It's like the people you surround yourself with, society, your socioeconomic status. Like it change can be good or bad. It's just however you want to make that change, you know?
It's it's the most annoying thing to me. It's one of those like existential crises about w- right, like you set your path about what you want to work towards and how you want to change, and it's like when you do, as a person who want, like, I, you know how I am about change and growth and all of that stuff, it's, you have moments where you kind of sit and you're like, well, and like you fall into like this bigger thing of like, what is the point of all of this?
Oh yeah, your existential crisis. Yeah.
Yeah, because then you're like, the real truth is, right, like no matter how much you change or don't change,
Yeah.
you're always coming to the same end.
Okay, everyone in this world is gonna die one day anyway, so why bother?
It's not even the why bother thing. It's like it doesn't make a difference. It's like
I mean,
this is a terrible connection, and it's so funny
okay.
because my cousin just graduated from school and he just made this connection. I was like, it's not just me. Like, people are starting to realize this. It's like the whole, and this is, I'm speaking from like real experience here, friends. It's like the, okay, I'm gonna go to graduate school and I'm gonna work really hard and I'm gonna have a 4.0 and I'm gonna do all this extra stuff, and then I'm gonna get the same piece of paper that the person who literally copied most of my thesis from me is gonna get, who is a straight barely C student.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're getting to the same endpoint,
Yeah.
but like, and you want to know what's super frustrating for me? And I don't think, and this comes a lot with like ego and all of that like terrible stuff that we're all trying to maintain all the time, is that for every person, when that change happens and what that change looks like is going to be different, but there's always going to be, going back to like our competition episode, like there's always going to be that, well, like, fuck that person. like like damn it, like, I'm
Yeah.
doing this, and right, there's always going to be that one person who's like, well, why do you get to do it? And then there's the other side of that that's like, well, we're doing the same thing and it's working out in a different way for you.
So,
It's
uh,
just, I'm in that place. I'm in that like
so you're in a place that.
satisfied, dissatisfied place.
So you're saying you're in a place that like, how do I word this? Like we're change like things are changing. Like you
And
clearly
that, right,
believe people change.
that's the, I do.
Like
And that's why
clearly.
I am in the place where I'm on the, like, I'm in the precipice of a big change. And the thing that's
Oh,
funny
I
is
see.
that it's not just, and I know it's going to be good change, but it's like that internal struggle of dealing with change because you want it to
Yeah.
happen sooner than it's going to happen. You have to go through all the work and you're like,
Yeah,
oh my
you don't want
God.
to do the work.
The funny
Yeah.
part of it is I'm in that change, going back to what we talked about with those areas. In all, I'm saying all three. I'm sure there's more, but it's these are the only ones
Yeah,
that I
the
can
top
identify.
three, if you
I'm
will. Yeah.
in those areas of change with my relationship. I'm in
Yeah.
those area, like an area of change with like myself as a person, and I'm in an area of change in like my professional life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I'm I was gonna say that I'm not anxious about it, but that's probably a lie because I've
That's
been
probably a
waking up
lie.
at 4 o'clock the last like
Oh,
3
then that's a lie. Yeah.
So I don't feel anxious, but
In a
like,
bad way.
right, like I'm not overly anxious and nervous and freaking out because I know it's all good stuff. But like my brain, right? Your brain, talk, going back to like your brain is constantly changing with all the stuff you're bringing in, you're rewiring it and all that stuff. Like my brain knows that too much stuff is going on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm like literally waking up at 4 o'clock. I woke up, it wasn't last night. I slept pretty well last night. But the night beforehand or the night before that, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I woke up like like
Oh my
I
god,
stopped
gasping.
I like stopped breathing in my, and I wasn't like I don't know. I guess I think that I, you know how you hit that point where you start to wake up and your conscience, like you're conscious and you have all those thoughts going on but your body is not awake yet?
Yeah, sleep paralysis. Like,
That I was
but
in
the other
like
way was it the other
that.
way?
I was like coming awake but not fully awake yet, and I think my brain turned on before the rest of my body turned on, and I think my brain short circuited and then it just shut off my function to breathe. And I was like, oh, and I literally woke up and like, what? Dan wasn't snoring. I had no idea what was going on. Um, but I woke up like unable to breathe, and then like tuned into like what was my body and mind came together, and I realized that like all of this stuff was like running rampant in my brain. Um,
Lovely. So you're on the precipice of change, and your
yes,
body's just reacting to it prematurely.
I think my body is like not reacting to it,
Oh,
and my
okay.
brain is like 300 feet in front of me.
But it's so, yeah, change is such hard. Again, living is such hard work,
Yeah.
maintaining and
Well, I mean,
changing.
and the reality of it, right, is like living is a constant state of change. And then it's
Correct.
so funny to me because I look at God, I love my father, but I look at my dad and he is like paralyzed by change. Like he
Yeah,
hates
I've known people like that. Yeah.
and that's a trauma thing. Like he doesn't
Yeah,
understand that that's
yeah.
a trauma thing and he's not in a place to realize it as a trauma thing. Um,
Right, right,
but that's
right.
a trauma thing.
Right. And it's just like, sorry, I have to move something. My like OCD kind of freaked out for a second.
You're
There's like
good.
there's something askew, like 45 degrees. I was like, I need to fix that. um,
You do not want to see what my desk looks like right now.
no. And I just changed my desk setup. So everything's kind of just like whatever. Anyway, so what was I saying?
You're talking, I don't know, you were going into, I was talking about my dad change and
Oh, and
trauma.
like yeah, and like you have to just accept that you can't do anything until someone wants to change. I think that's the
Oh, yeah.
hardest part,
Oh, totally.
right? Like that's I feel like the hardest part.
And that's where, like,
You get
it,
frustrated.
yeah, and like issues with other people start to arise, right? Where there's, there are different things that are like, and I know for me, the act of changing isn't what's paralyzing. The system or the path, like not having a clear system or pathway of how to change is what paralyzes me. I am an action
Yeah.
taker, but I'm
You're a
also an
to-do
over,
list person.
yeah, I'm an over analyzer. So if
Yeah.
I don't have a clear system, and this is something that I've learned from being somebody who owns businesses, because having a business is all about taking action constantly.
Right, right.
But like I see a difference in people in the way that they address change. Like there are, I
Yeah.
know of people who are like, up, shifting gears, like I'm ready to
Let's
go,
go.
like,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so like here's my analogy for this, right? There's somebody, there's a person who will change into a new car, right? And it's just like, all right, I'll figure it out as I'm driving, right? Like just going, pressing on the all the buttons, all the stuff, whatever. Then there's
Mm-hmm.
me who gets in the car and is like, mirror, mirror, mirror. Where are my windshield wipers? Where are the lights? How far
Yeah.
away is my seat? Like that's me. Like I have to like,
Where's the manual?
yeah, like it's this system. And then
Yeah.
okay, now I know what I'm doing. Go. But then there are other people who get in the car and are just will sit there and be like, I can't drive this, right? Like before they
Yeah,
even,
it's too new.
yeah, like the change is like too much
Yeah,
already.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and I think that's interesting too. But when you are,
Sorry, I just thought up of another
go ahead,
your
you,
car analogy. It's also like taking a step back. It's like the people that literally just go into a car dealership like the day of and like, I'm gonna buy a car today. Others that like take their time and like read every fucking review of every new car. And then the other
yeah,
one that's just like, I'm not gonna buy a new car.
yeah, they
Like,
go into it,
forget
they're
it.
like, nope.
Like even before getting into that damn car, there's three different paths too.
Yeah, yeah, and it's what it becomes a struggle is that if your approach to something is different than the approach to like the person that you're in that said relationship, whatever relationship it is, like you're working with in any capacity, then it creates an issue, right? Like
Yeah.
me, all those years trying to get Dan is a very different communicator now, um,
That's good. Yeah.
at least with me, and I know the signs better, like we know each other better, but as an example, right, we address communication in a very different way, and we used to do it in a very different way. So, like, if I am doing it my way and I don't understand his way, or there's like we're on a different page,
Yeah.
it's really hard to work with somebody that way. And actually, one of the really interesting things that um, David Eagleman was talking about was the ability to communicate
Mm-hmm.
and like how communication is a huge thing for like changing our brain. And it's like a
Yeah, I can,
huge, what's that word? Like
oh,
initiator, I guess. Like
sure.
not instigator. Maybe instigator? No, not
I don't
instigator.
know.
There's another word that I can't think of right now, but a huge
Sure.
thing that initiation works, I guess, that
Yeah.
like cues you in to being your brain being in a place where it's like, okay, I actively have to start,
Doing
doing
something.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Um, I'm trying. Speaking of change, I'm trying this thing called radical acceptance. Do you know what that
Ooh,
is?
where you said just literally like the Yes Man movie, you just say yes and like,
So it's like it's kind of like I say this all the time too. I just didn't think it was a radical acceptance, but like it is what it is. Like that
huh,
whole thing. Like you can accept something, and this doesn't mean like this excludes like trauma, bad like behaviors like that are actually like whatever, but like things such as like other people, like if the communication example, like if someone is communicating in a certain way that I just don't understand and it's frustrating me, it's just like that's them. I can't do anything about that. Let's just like accept it. Like
and then
so
that's the thing, you do get to change, right? You get to change like how you interact with that.
right, like exactly. So doing this whole radical acceptance thing of just like accepting you can't change other people's thought processes because you physically can't. Like, there's no way unless they want to do it themselves. Like, that's
Yeah.
also a big change. And like, it's been so frustrating because it's like, I know the right answer in my mind, but also that's just my mind, not theirs.
Yeah.
Like, that's my life and not yours. So why be that person to change them into something that I am, which isn't, we're two different people or
Yeah.
like, two different whatever. Um, so I'm going through that right now.
That's a
I'm
lot.
like, I'm like at that I'm at the precipice, like, or I'm past it a little bit. It's just like such a like speaking of change, it's so fucking hard. And I just don't want to do the work.
It
Like, but like it's necessary because like it's and I've seen it happen internally. Like I feel better, but
when
it's
you
so fucking
don't carry
hard.
the burden of somebody else's
Yeah,
bullshit.
as an empath, it's just like
Yeah.
this is much better than like stressing out about how I need to deal with someone else's weight. Like I don't need to though.
Yep.
So yeah, there's that.
And it's especially when people, as somebody who is an empath, and you end up sitting in the chair where people like to bestow their bullshit upon you.
Yeah.
It's harder to do that and just walk away from it.
And one of the like I don't know if they're called um one of the practices is to be an observer, not a participant, which is much
I
better.
had to, so just like, I have to do this all the time because
You have to step out
I
because you're not
just I
like you have
just
to
did this. I am so good at inserting myself into
yeah.
places where I don't need to be as a resource that I should not be inserting myself. But I have a I don't get involved unless asked to. That's my like new thing, right? Like I have to
And
remind
if they
myself like
never
you're not an EMT, like you
yeah.
don't need to use your CPR certification. That law, that rule does not apply all the time. But I
Yeah.
actually just had a lot of the time when this happens to me is when someone's dealing with something really heavy, which is actually really gross and dangerous because why would I step myself in front of that fucking bullet train?
Yeah,
Um,
no, same. Go on.
but I have someone who reached out to me about having someone there in their life that they're close to being sick. And I
Yeah.
work a lot. Like I have a lot of, unfortunately, have a lot of experience with sick people, and I work a lot with people who are not well,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like was asked
Help them out in some way.
to do something, right?
Sure.
And it took me some time. Like I had to, my old self would have been like, I have to do this the next day. I have to get this over with. Like this person asked this of me, like blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
I gave myself like 2 weeks to actually like, do something, was able to do something better. And then once I did that and I like put my foot in the door, they started talking, like this wasn't on them. This was totally my brain. They started talking about like, this person needs someone to be able to talk to you, like to be able to get out of there. And my immediate gut reaction was be like, volunteer. Like I volunteer as tribute. And I had to like stop myself. I literally was like, don't you fucking say anything. Like this is not you. Like you don't have to be that person. And it's
Right.
so
Like
funny because that I'm better at doing that when it's people that are like just far enough away from me that I can put my hand out.
there's like
But like
hierarchies.
if
Yeah.
there's anybody that's too like with my dad, everything with my
Yeah.
dad, like I didn't
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to, and I probably shouldn't have taken the reins on all of that the way that I did,
But it was your dad.
but I
Like,
wasn't not gonna. Right.
yeah, yeah,
I
whole
wasn't
different
not
story.
gonna.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
it's hard to.
I mean, that's the big change for us. Like, if you subscribe to radical acceptance, like, it's a big change,
Yep.
you
And
know?
you have to get it's a day. This is like with all things with change too. It has to be a small day by day, take it as it comes, moment
Yeah,
by
and like,
moment, and
I didn't know I was
fit it in.
doing it. I was doing it at work.
That's a good place to do
Which
it
is a
because you
good
need the
place to
most
start.
boundaries there.
Exactly, like that's the most exactly what you said, the most boundaries that I needed. I can't seep my professional life into my personal life anymore. It's just not possible. And it's not healthy. Um, so and day in day out, I'm like it I mean, my job is stressful just because the job is stressful to begin with. Like whether you like your job or not, it's still there's still stress like added into it. But I've reduced that stress because like literally I tell my staff all the time, I'm like, it is what it is. Like there's nothing we can do about it, like blah blah. Like and again, like I remind myself, like, what am I doing? Like I'm not
You
literally saving lives.
I have
Like
to tell you that I am so like so happy that you started talking about that because I use that all the time when it comes to work. I'm like, Brittany,
yeah, you're not
no.
saving lives.
Like
Like
you need a perspective check
you
on
do.
like what
Because
was
then
I
the stress
just
is gonna eat you
and
alive.
I was talking to somebody about or maybe I was talking it's highly likely that I was literally having a conversation with myself about this, but
That's
there
fair.
was like that sense of like and you said this like it's if you're not there, if you're not involved, it's not going to burn down. And remember how we
Yeah.
had this
Yes.
conversation around me being the person who was like I get anxiety when I don't show up to a thing that I like knew I was supposed to show up to.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
when I ground myself so much more because I'm able to be like
Yeah.
the world's not going to end.
It really isn't. And like once it clicks, because you can obviously say something, it could be your mantra for a while and then have it hit 3 years later. Like
Yep.
as soon as it hits, you're like, oh,
And
okay,
that's
like
another
this
thing
is great.
too. Like all change does that. It's funny,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
and it's, I mean, I see it all the time in the work that I do with my dance clients, and it makes me really laugh. But I'll have a dancer that I work with for a while, and their like studio might not know what we do, right? They might not know anything
Hmm.
about their training work,
Hmm.
and after a certain amount of time, their teacher will just be like, it's crazy. Like all of a sudden, one day they
Yeah,
walked like over a course of a couple months they walk in and they look totally different.
yeah,
Everything they
yeah.
just are like this looks better and they're able to do this more and like those are the reason like that's part of the reason why I do the work that I do because I just kind of sit in the corner and go like
I helped
and
out.
like yeah like I know why that's happening but um that's the compound that's have you ever read the book The Compound Effect
No.
by Darren Hardy? Dude, read it.
Okay.
I think I have two copies because Dan and I both wanted to read it at the same time, and we're not good at sharing things like that. Um, it is such an amazing book because it talks about change and it talks about how like the minimal increments of change that we make in
Add up.
building like it's habitual, it's based off habit, obviously, but um, has a huge change in our trajectory. And one of the big analogies that he makes that I think is really cool is that you if you were to get in a plane, right, and you're going to fly from Jersey to California and you have a, like you're going to land in Los Angeles, like if you are flying and the nose of that plane changes like an inch
Yeah.
every hour, you're landing
You're
somewhere
gonna
totally
land somewhere
different,
else.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just that whole concept of like having to do it. I mean, that's a negative change, right? You don't want that when you're going towards a target, that specifically. But
Right.
like he relates it to how if we make tiny incremental changes over the course of time, you'll see that they all compound, just like with like finances when you try to save
Yeah.
money.
Exactly.
But
Real life example. Yeah.
it takes like it takes like the effort in the consistency of the tiny action.
It's the consistency.
And I have to say, it's so funny because I relate this to health and wellness all the time. Is that we
Hmm.
either have the option to change on our own free will with the hope to like improve, right? Or we have to deal with something catastrophic and we don't have a choice but to change. And that's so much more uncomfortable because you have to, instead of having the amount of time to make those small increments and have it compound, you have to do a lot more work in a shorter amount of time for a desperate reason,
Hmm. Hmm. Right.
which is always what ends up happening with health and wellness. But you have so, I see so many more people who choose to do the
The
latter.
latter.
Myself
Because it's,
included. Like I've
yeah,
gotten to those
no,
points too.
I agree. It
It's
depends on,
just
again, it depends on the thing. And also, like, you just don't want to, and I'm saying all inclusive, you and me included, like, you just don't want to do the work half the time, more
it's
than half
not
the
fun.
time. It's not fun. Like, this isn't fun.
I was just listening to like two two like millennial entrepreneurs like doing a talk about like millennial mindset as a business person,
Uh-huh.
and they were talking about, and I loved this idea, like this thought. Do you remember when YOLO was like a thing?
Yeah.
And we were like,
It's another form
oh,
of it
I
is what
mean,
it is.
this is, yeah, but it's, if we're going to talk about like good and bad change, like that did not
Yeah.
bring about good change. That
Yeah,
brought
no,
about like
no, no, no.
reckless change in people's lives.
That was
And
like,
it
yeah.
encouraged that, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they were talking about how like millennials and younger people live by this concept of YOLO, of you only live once, as like a do whatever the hell you want, make a mess, like
with
whatever.
no consequences, really.
Right.
That's the other
And
side of YOLO.
right, and it's funny because we use that in a, like an almost derogatory way to impact our like daily decisions, but that sentence carries
Yeah.
so much weight. Like if you look at the philosophies of the world that can sum up to that, like it carries so much weight in you only get this once. Like, you only do this once. I mean, I believe in reincarnation. Do I think that I'm going to remember my this life? No, but like you
No, you're
only
not.
get
We're
to
not a
do
higher
this
power.
once. So it's like you have to do that. Like you have
Yeah.
to think that's the YOLO that we should be living by. And it's so
Yeah.
funny because I remember being, in my early 20s and being
Yeah.
like, "Yes, I want to go do this. Yes, I'm going to go do that. Yes to everything."
With
Right?
no
Like that,
repercussions. Yeah.
right. And like
Yeah.
no thought about
The
what was going
effects
to
of.
happen later. And I know like specifically like within the realms of like finances, relationships and communication, like literally physically injuring myself because that bullshit was what led to me hurting myself. Like
Yeah.
all of those bad things, like the ways that I negatively impacted myself and brought about not good change, happened because of that mindset. And it's so frustrating because that time of our lives is when we are the most like invigorated and we have the most literally have the most energy and we have the most place for like that
Hmm.
changing to be happening in our brain, and everything's so lively, and we just do it wrong. Like, and it's funny because I
Uh-huh.
know I'm not obviously the first person, nor will I be the last person to ever say that like youth is wasted on the young. But like, how have we not changed that? Like, how are we not doing better with that when it's like a common disease in
What the
the
night the uh being naive and like thinking you're invincible?
yeah. I feel like
I
it's
don't know.
the it has to be the pitfall to that hormonal bullshit that's happening.
Oh, like, yeah, like physiology or physically or whatever. Like, I think just the hormone imbalances and just like, I don't know, just being young, honestly, and having
And
all that
just
energy is just like you don't know what the fuck to do with yourself.
because like if you take the right kind of risks, and these are things that like it's funny because I'm reading a book um about like work life balance and all of this stuff and like preparing yourself for that, and
Hmm.
because we know I don't do that well.
No.
And it talks about how like when you're younger and you have more ability to take risks in the places that you don't have the ability to do when you're older, right? Like, or the things that like it's more intense, right? You have more ability to take risk within your work career path, the things you want to
Hmm.
do with your finances, what you want to do
Hmm.
with your time. um But if you look at like, and I'm talking about like precipice of like you're making the path for the rest of your life, like those 18 to 25 years, right?
So
Like
young.
we
Yeah.
spend our time in college, quote unquote. Like we spend our time,
Yeah, that's still norm. Yeah.
and it's funny because the norm isn't like go out and take risks and experiencing things and
No,
figure
it's
out
being
what you want to
conservative.
do.
It's really
Right.
be conservative.
It's like you should be already deciding what you want to do with the rest of your life in this time and only focusing on that. And then
Yeah.
it's like the finance part is like, well, you're already in debt because you chose to go to college, so you don't even have any option to take risk here. Like you're putting all your eggs in one basket of your like, and then you're spending money on like stupid shit, right? Like all of like
Yeah.
going out and travel and booze and all the things that you think you need to be doing at that time. And I'm saying this as like a you because I remember that this was totally my mindset too because that's what I was taught. Like
Yeah.
that's what was influencing us. And we just use it in a not great way, and like we create this entire
Persona off of your 18-year-old self.
of what it's supposed to be like, and it's there's a better way to utilize all of it. Like yeah, you should be taking risks, but like the risk that you should be taking shouldn't be like you don't need to go jump off a building and do something to physically like harm your life. You should be taking financial risk or taking career risk or like taking more risk in a way that's going to set you up to have a more fulfilling life
better
in the future.
a better like well-rounded life as opposed to
Yeah.
being siloed into your major or whatever path you
Yeah.
decide.
And then it's so much more. I mean, my husband's a perfect example, right? With everything that he went through with like changing his career, like it's it's a lot more of an intense experience when you're older. It just is. It's so much more intense. Um, and like that's the thing too, right? We don't ever have to. I honestly think it was a really good thing for him because I think it like, again forced you to change, right? In a
Yeah, it
good,
forces
really
you.
good way. Um, But as you get older, when all of this, like the space for you to be able to willingly make a change starts to go away, right? You're talking about like major investments. You're talking about like, and I mean like of your time, your energy, your finances, your everything. You don't have as much wiggle room to take
Mm-hmm.
a risk. And then the things that feel really risky,
You don't want to regret it. I
right?
think that's what holds people back, obviously.
Because you've built. Remember that
You've built something
game.
stable.
Do you remember that game where like the levels of the building would like swing overhead and you'd have to hit the right time for them to drop so they stacked up all the way?
Yeah, I vaguely remember that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Remember that? It was like a game concept for a while. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
when you're younger, right, and you don't have a lot of like floors to your building, it's okay if they get a little messy, right? Because then you can reorganize them and build again. But if you have a tower that's freestanding and you've been very consistent about your blocks, if you set one off ever so slightly and then you
Yeah,
keep
your
kind of
foundation's
deciding to,
gonna.
yeah, like it's, you're going to
Yeah.
fall, you're going to be top heavy and you're going to fall. Right? The bigger they are, the harder they fall. It's relevant to like
Literally.
your life. The longer you live and the less risk you take and the more you
It's so and like
change then, like the less you change then, the harder it is to change when you get older.
and it's like the worst part is like you're sacrificing your potential happiness in one end and then being consistently just like content in your stable mindset, you know?
Do you know how many? It's funny because the book that I'm reading literally was just talking about this. How many devastating stories I've heard of, and like
Oh God.
seen it in people of like, yeah, I went like I was 50 and decided that I was gonna leave. Like the like classic story of like the 50-year-old man who goes through a midlife crisis and just abandons his family. Like,
Yeah.
oh,
Like where did that come from? Is
well, we
that
know
like
where that
the
comes from. That comes from the systems. But like, why do we let that happen? Like, why do we still let that happen? I
I
mean,
don't have
I'm
an
not that worried
answer,
about it because it's not
clearly.
going to be my life and it's not going to be Dan's life, and
Yeah.
that's all that matters to me. But
Why does that keep happening?
yeah,
Right? I
yep,
don't know. I don't know. Cause again, it's probably the same thing with like being an early 20-year-old. Like you are siloed into whatever you choose when you're 18 to 21. And you think
mm-hmm.
that that's the right course of action because it's less risky.
Yeah, and I
And
think
you kind
that
of, you know,
it's funny because when we look at like quarter life crises and midlife crises, I feel like quarter life crises happen because we're a quarter of the way of through our lives and we're aware of how much time we have and how much option we still have, right? And we have to make a decision and we're like, ah. But then when
yeah,
you're at like your midlife crisis, I feel like people only have a midlife crisis if they're the other end of that. If they feel like really stuck in where they are and they don't have a lot of choices and they're not happy with the choices they've made, then they have a midlife
Then they
crisis.
have a crisis. Yeah, because
Right.
it's like kind of instant regret.
Yeah. How sad is that? But
Um,
I just,
yeah,
that whole, which is why like you need to spend your whole life changing. And why I don't know, I just wish that I would rather be in a place where I am changing and have like these existential crises around the
I
change while
hate being
being in the
stagnant.
right, while
Yeah,
being in the process than being ignorant and just sitting right in like the stagnant puddle.
and it's funny because like I don't like being stagnant, but I know parts of me haven't changed, which is
Hmm.
going back to the very beginning of
And then like
this.
the values thing, right? Like
Yeah,
that's
it's
a big
like,
thing.
and or like even like the bad habits that I have. Like I feel like, and I internally I'm like I gotta change this, but it is like that's the hardest of my battles is like changing the bad habits. You know,
Snaps.
so it's like,
Agreed.
and in that sense, like radical acceptance isn't the best course of action with like the bad habits and stuff. Um, but right now I'm just gonna be like, it is what it is.
And it's like you can't change who you are or what you are without understanding where you're coming from anyway.
Right. And also, yeah, you can't overthink it too. There's a
Yeah.
fine line that I haven't figured out yet. Because once you start overthinking, it's like you're stuck.
Oh yeah. And
Nothing's gonna happen.
whenever I try I go through this really fun cycle of like I don't want to do this anymore. Like I have a bad habit that I don't want to do anymore. I'm going to put in like this really drastic like change of it. Like if I was ever a smoker or ever an addict, I'd be like the I'm going to cold turkey. Like I would
And
I
not wean
would
off.
yeah, and then I'd be really good for like a week or two and then I would automatically go back to it because
Yeah.
I do that with like my like my procrastination habits and a lot of that comes from anxiety and like my
Yeah.
mental
Yeah.
paralysis that comes from like my really deeply rooted fears that are based off of traumas that I've experienced to just train that all the way back, guys.
Right,
Um,
right, right.
but it's really hard to change those habits, and the most annoying part are the things that you want to change about yourself the most, like talking about like being like in the process and wanting it to go faster in changing. Like
Mm-hmm.
those
Mm-hmm.
are the things that you don't
You
get to
can't rush.
right. You have to sit in it. So I totally understand that. I've I've been getting better at figuring out the ways that work for me, like
Yeah,
having
yeah.
something to be accountable to or someone to
Yeah.
be accountable to. Like I'm definitely there's another really good book called The Accountability Circle
Hmm.
um
Okay.
that talks about like how to do that well. Because I also have a fine line of like I don't need you to baby me and hold my hand, but I also kind of need you to like be
Yeah.
there and yell at me a little bit if I'm not doing
And then
what I'm
you
supposed to be doing.
and then you get mad when they yell at you.
Yeah. But I also like know that I'm supposed I'm really guys, I'm really
Oh no, I'm the same
authority
way.
on every front for
I
me
get
is just fucked up.
and like I get called out all the time, specifically by Ashley, and it's just
Right.
like you're not. I'm not mad at her. It's just mad.
Yeah.
I'm mad at the fact that like
No, you're mad at yourself for putting yourself in a situation to give them space to do that. That's how I get.
yeah, I hate
And
being
then I
called out.
just
Number
like
one,
instead of
yeah,
being mad at myself, I'd rather just be attitudey towards you.
which
That's
is
how that works.
obviously unfair to anyone, but also
Right.
like
But that's an ego thing, right? You're
that's an
protecting your
ego
ego,
thing,
which
and it's
is
like
another thing that's super annoying. Like that talk about changing that thing like you can't change that because it's attached to
it's attached to something
your
that you're not.
survivor skills. Like that's
Yeah,
innate. What you have to do is learn how to manage it and it's a dick. So it's hard to
yeah,
do that.
yeah, and
Oh
it's
geez.
like, and I think I'm better now, as she can probably tell you otherwise, but it's that change has been so difficult, and like it's not like me trying not to get called out, but like the the uh the thing that I'm getting called out for, obviously that is what I have to change, and it's just like
Yeah.
so fucking difficult.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But I'm hoping this radical acceptance thing is I think it's working, because something happened the other day and I'm like, I can't get myself involved in this. It is what it is. And it took me like a few hours, but I was like, all right. Like, I'm over it, which is
Cool
much better than
beans.
like a few days. Like,
Yeah. And the fact that you can like just because you said yes to doing it now doesn't mean you're gonna do it forever.
right.
Right? Like you just have to that's like I just put myself on like a 90-day
Mm.
um like thing to make sure that I'm doing shit that I need to be doing. Um I'm going to do it for 90 days and then I'm going to assess and then I'm going to see if I have to do it a different way. Or maybe
Mm-hmm.
after I'm done with that I'll like yeah, figured it out. Like it's that's another thing about it too is you have to figure out what works best for you. And like my personality is different than your personality, so like the way that we tame our beast is going to be different.
Right. And like, again, being an empath, like, it's the hardest thing to probably tell someone, is to let the other person in front of you do whatever they gotta do.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
like, even if it is frustrating for you, like, let them handle it. And if they need you, they'll probably let you know. And if not, then oh well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And then having to make space from the people who you know are going to use you as a crutch, realizing that that's what they're doing, and then actively making yourself step away from that is also very important. But again, all
Boundaries.
of this stems right, and that's how you do it with boundaries. All of this stems from having that awareness. Okay, so are you ready? I wanted to read this to you because you know how Facebook tells you like your memories from like
Oh God. Yeah.
previous years. I
A
think this was
decade ago.
an Instagram post that I did last year. But I also went to Facebook. So
Sure.
I was reading it and I was like, oh, first of all, relevant to this conversation, but also I feel like, remember how when we first started talking about how we were going to call this Be More, and then we were like, we don't know why, and we don't know how our conversations are going to relate to this, but it
Yeah.
is a Be More. Okay.
Yeah.
So I read this and I was like, oh, so cool. Okay, ready? You obviously, I got this from somewhere and just like spewed it out in my own words,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you are the sum of every experience that you have ever encountered. Talk about change.
Yeah.
Some are good, some not so much. You can be more than what has happened to you then or when. It all has to start with your awareness.
Wow. That was you how many years ago?
No, I said this, I think this is a post from last year, but
Oh,
isn't
okay,
that
gotcha.
just like,
That's yeah. That sums it up pretty well, huh?
that's our show.
Yeah.
We
No, I
talk
agree.
about like all of our experiences that are good or not so good. And then we decide like, how do we want to be more than what has happened to us? And we start by
Literally.
talking about it and building our awareness.
Yeah. There's literally nothing else I can say.
Like, isn't that so perfect?
Seriously.
It just creeped me out because I was like scrolling through. I was like, oh, let's look at what's on here because I never go on Facebook. I'm like, let's look at what's on here from a year ago,
And that's
and
what came up.
because I don't go on my page anyway, and that came
Yeah.
up, and I was like, whoa, trippy.
The universe works in weird ways. The
Yes, it
older you get.
does. It knows so much more than me. Um. So yeah, that's how we
That's how
can
we're
end
gonna.
our day today.
That's how we're gonna end that.
So, in addition to all the stuff that I just said, because I don't think I can make that our outro. It's way too long.
No.
Um, but I hope that you remember to. I don't know. I don't remember what I'm supposed to say. I don't have it open. I'm being terrible right now.
It's okay.
Something about. Oh, oh,
Being
oh, oh.
more.
Don't be. Oh, I'm gonna add this in. Don't be afraid of change
Hmm.
or to be more because you deserve the best life. Something like that. Don't be afraid of change. Don't be afraid to change or be more because you deserve the best from this life. Something around that. We're going to circle back. I'm going to change it a little bit so that there's like a little bit of place that I can like make it relevant to our episode that we just had a
You
conversation about.
deserve to live your best life, so don't be afraid to be more.
Yes. I knew
Okay,
it was
bye.
around that.
All right, bye.